All right, everybody. I'm trying to do this again. There we go. All right. Welcome. It's been a bit. It's nice to be back to this. We've between Israel, between bar mitzvahs, between Shavuot. There's been a lot of things that have made this class. Unfortunately, not something we were able to do over the course of a couple of weeks. So it's great to be back, and just in time for the largest Torah portion in the Torah, Parshat Naso. Now, Parshat Naso is a fascinating Torah portion in the fact that, on the one hand, a lot of unique and varied topics to sink our teeth into, and at the same time, quite a lot of redundancy. If anybody would be considering, if you would ask as a trivia question, which parshas has seemingly the most, or has the most seeming redundancies, because nothing in the Torah, of course, is redundant, then those in the know would immediately say this Torah portion. Because really the whole second half of this Torah portion is talking about the process of the inaugural offerings that each prince of the tribes of the Jewish people would bring. And it was a very intricate process. They brought a vessel that was held that weighed 130 shekel, and another vessel that weighed 70 shekel, both made of silver, and then a golden spoon that held 10 measures, and then one cow, one bullock, and one ram. One bullock, one ram, and one lamb. For this type of offering, and then 5 bullocks and 5 rams and 5 lambs for this time, and a goat for this time. It was very intricate process of offerings that the prince of the tribe would bring. And fascinatingly, even though this is generally not Rashi's thing, Rashi doesn't engage in the allegory or the metaphoric. He speaks to the simple understanding of a verse. In other words, if it's simply understood, even if per se you would want a little bit more context, Rashi says that's not my role in this commentary. There's many other commentaries. My role in this commentary is to clear up any challenges you would have in understanding the simple and most basic reading of the Torah. So if there would be contradictions, if there would be words that are not understood, if there would seem to be things out of place or out of chronological order, Rashi addresses those things. But things as to why did God specifically want this type of offering and not that type of offering, Rashi doesn't necessarily engage in the allegoric or the metaphoric reasons behind things. Except that Rashi does give us over here the inner meaning behind the process of these offerings. That the first offering, the silver vessel which held 130 is a reference to Adam, and the second one that held 70 was a reference to Noah, and then the bullock and the lamb and the ram represents Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and so on and so forth. He actually talks about the metaphoric meaning behind these offerings. And so it isn't intricate, and therefore it's worth the Torah reporting each detail about the process of the offering. What seems to be redundant about it is that the Torah repeats the exact same process 12 times. Because the total of 12 tribes, really 13 tribes, now that we've divided the tribe of Yosef into 2, Manasseh and Ephraim, and the tribe of Levi did not offer this offering, and so you had 12 remaining heads of the tribes, princes of the tribes that were bringing offerings, and they gave the identical offering. The identical process, the same thing, the 2 silver containers and the 1 gold spoon, and the bull and the ram and the lamb, and the 5 and the 5 and the 5. And even now, as I'm saying it, you already hear my voice kind of me moving through it quickly because I've already told you the process. And In the Torah, which doesn't waste a single letter, repeats every detail of the process exactly as it said it the time before, 12 times, one right after the other. The only thing that changes is which day they brought it and what was the name of the prince and of which tribe they belong. That is the only difference. And it says on the first day, Nachshon ben Aminadav from the tribe of Yehuda, he brought the offering, and this was the offering that he brought. Second day, it was Netanel ben Suar from the tribe of Yisachar, and there we go. And again, the whole thing. And the third day, from the Zvulun, Eliav ben Chelon, and the whole thing again. And it takes time to go through all the details of the offering. So by the time you do it 12 times, that itself is almost the length of a Torah portion. Just repeating that same paragraph 12 times. And it spans 3 significantly long aliyot in order to get through all of them. And then if it's not enough that we go through all 12, it then does the math for us at the end and adds it all up together. So in total, we have 12 of these and 12 of these. And then if the 50 times 12 is 60, 60 of this, 60 makes the count all up and gives us the grand total. So very fascinating, and in terms of the redundancy, because as we know that whenever there is a seeming redundancy in the Torah, that has to be explored, because there is no such thing as redundancy. And if the Torah is saying it 12 times, there's something to learn from each and every time. And on a basic level, and this does teach us a very important message. Is that even though the same offering and the same process was brought every single day identical, each one of the princes of the tribes brought it with a different mindset, with different kavanah. And so it was an entirely different offering. It was an entirely different offering. Even though the process, the vessel was the exact same 12 times, the spirit was very different. The kavanah was very different. Why is this an important lesson? This is an important lesson because we pray the same davening every day. Same words. We do not deviate from the text one bit, and that's why we can pick up the siddur every single day of the week, and it's going to be the exact same words, and it's going to be the correct thing to say today. And one can make an argument that gets redundant and boring and samey, etc., etc. And maybe we should change it up a little bit. Maybe this time I'll add this kind of prayer or that kind of prayer, etc. And the answer is that what defines the prayer is really not as so much the words, but it's your kavanah. And every day is a different day. So therefore, every day the kavanah, and that's on you, each and every one of, well, not you, us, to pray a different prayer. It doesn't have to be doesn't mean that the words have to change, but it does mean that we have to put different kavanah into the words. It has each day. If it's going to be a new day, if today's is not going to be a carbon copy of the day before, I'm going to approach the day. If my approach to the day is going to be different, then my approach to the prayer has to also be different. And when I'm praying for this or for that, for health and for success and for wisdom, etc., each day that prayer is going to be slightly different. It doesn't have to be radically different, but it does have to be different, and therefore the prayer is not redundant at all. To illustrate, these little Yiddish anecdotes that are cute and simple and simultaneously incredibly profound. So they have a cute little story. They say that a certain Baal Shem Tov's Yid, as they call him, Baal Shemski Yidden, which generally is the moniker for the Jews back in the shtetl that were simple, but and uneducated, but yet devoted to God with a pure and a simple devotion that the Baal Shem Tov felt was were just diamonds. These people, each one of these people were a diamond. Unfortunately, until the Baal Shem Tov came around, the establishment and leadership of Judaism looked down at these people, these uneducated and therefore unsophisticated, and therefore, in their opinion, bad Jews, because they didn't know how to study Talmud, and they didn't know, therefore, how to engage in the nuance of halacha and academia of Torah. Most of them didn't even know how to read. but they would, and probably therefore did many of the mitzvot incorrectly because they didn't know how to read the Talmud, and therefore gleaned the instructions or the Shulchan Aruch. So maybe they didn't daven Shachris in its proper time or Mincha in its proper time, and they definitely didn't have an understanding of the intricacies on of all the details of Pesach or Shavuot or kosher, and all, but they were trying their hardest, and they were doing so with an utter devotion, and they were as from could be, even if they were not executing on their frumkeit as exact in accordance with Shulchan Aruch, because they just didn't know. They weren't educated to know, but they were holy, holy Jews. And so one such holy Jew, one such Baal Shem Tov Yid, couldn't afford his own childhood. His parents couldn't afford to send him to a malamed, to a teacher, and for sure not to a yeshiva. He made it his goal in his life, his mission in life, that to give his child a better chance than he himself had. And so he was from a very early on, he was putting some money aside so that when the day would come and his child would come of age, he would be able to send him off to a yeshiva and to become, in fact, an educated person. And that day arrived, and very proudly, he looked at his young gentleman, his son had grown up, and he packed him up some food, and packed him some other provisions. He gives him a pair of pants, new pair of pants, and he says, "This is your pair of pants that you will have." And he gave him the money for the yeshiva, sends him off, and he says, if you ever need anything, write home. Write back, write a letter to us, and even though we can't read, I'll get somebody to read it, and we'll make sure you're well taken care of. Okay, a couple of let's say months or a year into his life in the yeshiva, the one pair of pants that he was sent with tears, rips. It's time to get a new pair of pants. So he writes back. He knows that being that his father would have to take this letter to somebody else, he keeps it very short, sweet, to the point. And he writes in Yiddish, "Tate shik hazen." Tate, father, shik, send, hazen, pants. Tate shik hazen. A 3-word letter. The letter arrives back home, and his father opens it up and sees it's a short letter. The son clearly needs something, and so he goes to the marketplace and finds somebody who is literate and who can read this letter. And it's a busy market day, and he's not having any luck with finding either anybody who is literate or anybody who has the time of day for him. Finally, he grabs somebody, says, "Please, can you read?" He says, "I can, but I don't have time." And he says, I know, but it's a very, very short letter. I just need, if you can please just read and tell me what the letter says." And the fellow grabs the letter and says, "Father sent pants." Hands the letter back. Father's insulted. My son is writing with such impatience. He's writing with such chutzpah and such impatience. I'm not going to send him the pants. His mind's made up. He goes back home. A couple of weeks go by, and the pants don't arrive. So the son sends, he was not sure if the letter ever arrived or what was the story. So the son sends an identical letter, same 3 words, Tata Shekhez. Letter arrives, the father opens up, he sees that his son sent him another letter. He can't read it. He goes to the marketplace for somebody to read. This time he sees somebody lounging, eating his lunch. He says, "Sir, can you read?" He says, "I could." He says, "Do you mind taking a couple seconds and reading this letter? It's not a very long one." The fellow says, "Sure, no problem." Hands him the letter, and the fellow reads it and says, "Tata Shikhazen, father, send pants." "Oh, now my son is writing with a little bit more respect and a little bit more patience. Now I'll send him the pants." Right? So the point is that the words haven't changed, but it's all about, in a sense, the sentiment. And in this case, it wasn't even a change in sentiment. It was the change in sentiment was in the reader, not in the one in the writer. But the point is that kavanah is incredibly important. It could be the same exact words, and it's really very much about what kind of spirit you put into it. So although the offerings were the exact same in a material sense, they were all very, very, very different. And obviously God appreciates it, because God is not looking at the roasted meat of the offering. God is not into barbecue. That's not what motivates It's about the offering. That's what it's all about. The cow, and the bullock, the ram, and the lamb. These are just the vessels for the offering, and so every offering was in fact differently, and so different. And so when the Balkore reads it, and when the people in the congregation are hearing it, that's how they have to try to imagine what would the prince of the tribe of Yehuda versus the prince of the tribe of Zebulun, what would they be putting in terms of their kavana into this offering? What are they thanking God for? What are they praying to God for? Etc. So that's one thought on the parsha. But before, go ahead, sure.
So for the different princes for the different tribes, was there like a significance to the different types of kavana, or?
Yes. If you really want to have an amazing sense of the unique nature of each one of the tribes, what makes them unique and special, you have to turn to Paula Tovenfeld.
Oh, stop.
Well, I didn't hear you.
Yosef is in your inbox, by the way.
I already responded.
Oh my gosh.
Paula is working on an incredible project. Paula is an artist in the greatest sense of the word. It means not only has God blessed her with a very artistic talent, but also the ability to kind of touch on the spirit or the soul of something and express it in the art. And I came to Paula with a big project that our shul, brand new shul, and the walls need to be adorned with artwork that are conducive to inspiring people that are in the shul. And the name of a shul is a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering. And the idea is that we all come with, as we are talking about right now, unique, each one of us with unique characteristics, unique flavor, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the place where we all gather together, each one of us in our unique way, and we add to the tapestry that is Jewish prayer and Jewish devotion. And we do it all together. And that's the point, that we each bring our own individuality, but together create a unified tapestry. And so what I asked of her is to undertake art that will be on the wall of the shul of each one of the tribes of the Jewish people, and to try in her art to capture the spirit of each tribe, with the stone that is unique to the tribe and the various. And then Paula has a real sense also for the blooms and flowers, etc., and how they also speak to the uniqueness of each tribe and what its contribution to the people, where the soul of the individual carry that name, and therefore the tribe that are the kin of that particular individual. I can say that she doesn't just doesn't just compose the artwork. She puts together a Devar Torah with each one of her submissions of in a sense the proof of the artwork. And
Carrie,
it's really
that's just because if you looked at the painting, you wouldn't know what the hell was going on. You need the essay to explain what it is. I just want to say one more thing, and then you can keep waxing poetic. But on Yosef, for the first time, I had a helper. Sudi proofread the essay. So we have to thank Sudi for the way Yosef is read.
It's even better. If the whole idea, as we've been talking about, is a collaboration of disparate talents and spirit and the spirits, and everybody comes together to create a beautiful result, then this itself is fulfilling that aspect of it. So what I mean to say is, Carrie, first of all, thank you for teeing up an opportunity to show gratitude to Paula, because I literally, not too long before this class, is when I responded to the latest entry that Paula sent. The latest, who just finished the Yosef. I want to say I don't want to state. I don't know if where in the process all these things are, but it's a finished product. No, I'm saying Yosef is a finished product. To me, it's a finished product.
Great.
Yeah. But either way, Carrie, what I will tell you is like this: there is so much written about the nature of each one of the tribes, and they were very nuanced individuals and very nuanced tribes. Because even if the individual was in one particular way, there are oftentimes, as you then go through the narrative of their history, the tribe will draw on either the best or oftentimes not necessarily the best of the individual who was the progenitor of that tribe. I'll give you two examples. Levi as a person was and obviously all of them were immense figures, et cetera, but there was, let's say, some kinks that had to be worked out, which is why when Yaakov gave him a blessing, he the blessing for Levi was not a entirely positive one, but the message was heard, and the tribe of Levi really rose to become one of the greatest, most devout, and most committed tribe, which is why they are the Levites, and within them is the Kohanim, because they ended up being, one can argue, the most loyal of all the tribes of Israel to God. And then you have Levi's counterpart, Shimon, who also, in a sense, got caught up in some of the machinations that Levi went, and also received some less than entirely positive words from Yaakov, the individual named Shimon. And the tribe of Shimon did not, in a sense, achieve the same level of the mastery of the good qualities that their progenitor did possess and could have been realized in the children, as the tribe of Levi did, and which is why, as a tribe, they later also they received rebuke and in fact lost out in a blessing at the end in Mizot HaBracha. So it is really a fascinating thing to go through each one of the tribes. The Midrash actually takes it a step further. The Midrash, in listing each one of the Midrash on this week's Torah portion, lists each one of these heads of the tribe and their offering, and actually clarifies, it does tell us the kavanah that the heads of these tribes had. And it says they primarily each had in mind two prayers, or two principal kavanot when they were offering it up. L'shem shvachan shel Yisrael, they would offer it up with the praise of their tribe in mind, and the praise of all the Jewish people, and also l'shem geulatan shel Yisrael, they had in mind a prayer for the redemption of their people. So a praise and a prayer. And each one brought a unique perspective on this, and oftentimes was associated with the name of their tribe. So like the prince of the tribe of Asher, not surprisingly, when he was speaking the praises of the people, was the Ashrei, right? The Ashrei Yoshrei Beitach. And he had that in mind as he was now. You could say, wait a minute, how did he have in mind Ashrei when he preceded King David, who wrote the Ashrei by many centuries? Well, but we know that in a certain sense, principles of the Torah are timeless, and ideas that King David later, sentiments that King David later composed, were sentiments that already had existed. Was it exactly the words of Ashrei? Was the theme of Ashrei? You'll have to ask the author of that midrash which one of them is more accurate. But the point is, if you really would like to see it, the midrash does a pretty comprehensive treatment of what the kavanot of each one of these princes were. So that, I mean, it turns what seems to be a relatively redundant part of this Torah portion into really a fascinating read. Having said that, before we get to that half of the Torah portion, the first half of the Torah portion has some very interesting and compelling points. in that two very dramatic figures of Jewish life are discussed in one aliyah, back to back, without any apparent bridge between them. So it almost causes like mental whiplash when we move from this subject to this subject so quickly. And that same aliyah then ends with one of the most famous set of verses in the entire Torah. And what am I referring to? The fourth aliyah of this parsha, really kind of smack in the middle of this parsha, is one of the longest aliyahs in the Torah, because again, in one aliyah, it tackles three subjects.
Kohen and Nazir?
The Nazir, not the Kohen, but the Nazir is correct. Well, actually, you're right. The Kohen is.
I thought so.
Right. The Nazir, the Sota, and the
Rest.
Birkat Kohanim.
Bingo.
Nazir is the Nazarite, a very laudable and holy individual. The Sota is the promiscuous woman, almost the opposite in the fact that not laudable at all. And while the Nazir is a paragon of self-restriction, the Sota is an example of promiscuity. And then the aliyah abruptly concludes with the Birkat Kohanim. Yivrechecha Hashem yishmerecha, Yair Hashem panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. And so you're talking about the Nazir, and then to the Sota, and then to the Birkat Kohanim, and it just seems, or rather the other way around, Sota, Nazir, Birkat Kohanim, and it's just this really this patchwork of each one of these, really an intense and dramatic and a profound concept, and they're all thrown together, not only in the same Torah portion, in the same aliyah, without any break. It's like you're from one breath to the other. You've moved on to the subject that is on, one can argue, the diametric opposite end of the spectrum. So let's talk about it. Without getting into a lot of details, the sordid details, the Sota represents the lowest in a sense, the basest of natures and indulgences and promiscuity. And if the Sota is not guilty, then she's not a Sota, right? And life carries on if she's falsely accused, etc. But she's accused only with probable cause. And what is a probable cause? Is that she is engaged in the type of behavior that causes her husband to suspect her. She's not a Sota yet, just because a husband could be suspicious. A husband could be irrationally suspicious, and many a husband are. You know, we're not saying that that every fellow is rightfully indignant and rightfully suspicious. The next step is what happens is that in front of witnesses, this suspicious husband warns his wife to not be secreted alone in a room with a particular person. It has to be a particular person. You cannot say, I don't want you in a room alone with any man. It has to be a particular point. That's what I was saying. It has to be probable cause, as it were, probable cause for this suspicion. Now, here's the thing, and this is why, to a certain degree, she is guilty. And warrants the process that she will then have to go through, because according with Jewish law, a married woman should not be secreted in a room alone with any man. Period. These are called the laws of yichud, and obviously the man with a woman. It's vice versa. A man and a woman are not meant to be alone in a room together if they are not married. And especially, and even if they are both unattached, as it were, they shouldn't be in a room alone either. And definitely, if one or both of them are attached with somebody else, they should not be in a room alone. And what we mean alone is not like both of them happen to be in a big banquet hall and nobody else is in the room. we're talking about seclusion. We're talking about secluded in a room without any witnesses, without any, like no windows or anything like that, long enough in a tight and confined space, long enough for something wrong to happen. So he gives her this warning, and she goes ahead and disregards the warning and witness that she does secret herself in a room with somebody. Now, if the witnesses have either seen, if the witnesses have seen what they did in this room, good or bad, i.e., that either nothing really happened or what he suspects happened actually did happen, then this is not either the case of the sota. Either she's off scot-free because the witnesses will come and say, yeah, nothing happened there. We saw that nothing happened. Or we saw that something in fact did happen, and then she's not a sota. Then they are both guilty of extramarital affair, and the Torah, we know the Torah's consequence for that. The sota is a case where the witnesses say we saw her going in, but we don't know what happened there. And so, and she herself will not, she can't either bring proof, and she herself denies the claim that anything happened. Now, usually in a case with the Torah is the source of the idea of innocent until proven guilty. But in this case, it's a probable cause aspect. This was somebody that your husband warned against because he already suspected some suspicious behavior, and he gave you the warning to not secret yourself in this person with this woman. You shouldn't be secreting yourself with any man, and this person in particular, you were warned in front of witnesses not to, because apparently there's probable cause for suspicion. And now, in this case, there is a process to vet the truth of the matter, and includes an oath, a written oath from God as to what will occur if she's guilty. It is then erased. It is then mixed with waters, etc., and then she has to drink these waters, and the waters will end up verifying her innocence or her guilt based on the consequence of what happens to her when she drinks the water. That's in short the story of the sota. It's a sordid matter. It's a sordid matter, and a woman that even if she is found to be innocent of the actual crime of an affair, has brought this about because of promiscuous behavior. And then you have the Nazir. The Nazir on the other end of this, he or she, by the way, if we're, well, just to balance it out, if anybody, a man or a woman wants to become a Nazir, a Nazirite, which means they want to restrict themselves from elements within this world that are of an indulgent nature, that the enjoyment can be of an indulgent nature. For example, wine and the grapes, etc. They make an oath to abstain from these pleasures. The Talmud says, why is this in proximity to this? Why is the story of the Nazir in proximity to the story of the sota? It says because in the society, in the ideal society of the Jewish people, let's say in the days of the temple, where this process of the sota would be carried out, if the events line up that it would be necessary to, then what society would hope, what the Torah would hope for, as it were, was that in the immediate aftermath of such a tragic event like a sota playing out, there should be a rash of individuals taking on the oath of Naziritehood, of Nizirut, because when faced with the terrible fallout of promiscuous behavior, what this should do is cause people to become introspective, and the result should be that people that feel that they might themselves be susceptible, if they do not engage in a certain amount of self-restriction, would take the step of Nazirut, kind of in the period of reflection after this what will basically be a national tragedy, I would say, a cultural tragedy of the case of a sota. And so that the Torah would hope that in a society living by the values of Torah, that if there would be a case of sota, the response would be that many people would then use that as an opportunity, or wake up call, as it were, and take on the oath of Nazirut.
Rabbi, I
Yeah.
thought I had learned that Hashem doesn't really love Nazirut. Oh, okay.
Exactly. This is where we're going
Oh, okay.
with it. Okay. But before I go there, let me, because I'm going to back up to exactly what you're talking about. Before I back up, I'm going to pull a little bit more forward and then back up.
Good.
And then the last part of the Aliyah is, again, very like suddenly we throw in start of a new paragraph. God tells Moshe, so shall you say to Aaron and his children, that they will be responsible with blessing the nation, and you shall say to them, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka v'yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom v'samu eshmi al b'nei Yisrael v'ani avarachem. They shall place my name. In other words, this is what they should say. Again, so let me actually give you the full quote so we have a sense of it. By the Hashem Moshe, Emar el Aharon ve'el banav. Go say to Aaron and to his children, Ko tevarachu et b'nei Yisrael. So shall they bless the Jewish people. And Mar lahem, this is what you should say to them, that they should then use these words to bless the people. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. May Hashem bless you and may He protect you. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka. May Hashem shine His countenance upon you and show you grace. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. May Hashem raise His face to you, turn His face to you. V'yasem lecha shalom, and place upon you peace. V'stamu echmi al b'nei Israel, and the Kohanim shall place my name upon the Jewish people. V'ani avarachem, and I will bless them. End of the fourth aliyah. So an intense aliyah. Now one could say that the reason that we end with that kind of bracha is that it's been an intense aliyah, very dramatic aliyah with the sota and with the nazir. It's intense and it's heavy stuff. So God throws in a bracha just to kind of like, give a little bit of a smelling salts, as it were, after such a heavy aliyah. So a little bit of a pick-me-up. But obviously everything in Torah is exact. So why did we drop this in after these, again, seemingly non sequitur subjects? And the answer is, backing up a little bit, let's go back to kind of what Paula was talking about, which is I mentioned that the Nazir is a great individual, a holy man, a paragon of self-restraint and of asceticism, committed to not indulging and to live a holy life. Yes, in fact, some of the greatest people ever were committed Nazirites. Can anybody name for me two of them? One is very famous, and one is right, and one is very famous, but not a famous Nazirite. Most people don't know that he was a Nazirite. Shimshon is the famous Nazirite. Everybody knows that Samson was a Nazirite. The whole story of Delilah cutting his hair and him losing his strength, etc., etc. Shimshon is probably the world's most famous Nazirite. But actually, there's a name that's even more famous than Shimshon, except that most people don't know that he was a Nazirite, that he was a Nazir. I'll give you a hint. His name has many same letters as Shimshon.
Moshe.
Close. You're right. But actually starts in the same order as Shimshon does. The letters in the same order.
Well.
Very good. Very good. Shmuel. Samuel. Samuel was a Nazirite. Shmuel Hanavi, the great Samuel, the last of the judges, the kingmaker, the prophet and judge who we know that was so devoted to God, so much a figure, an impactful figure, that an entire book of scripture is named after him, and not just any book, but the second book of scripture, the one that tells us really the whole story of King David, King Malachim, the next story of Kings is actually really after King David. If you want to read most of the King David's life, you have to go to the book of Samuel. And so Shmuel was a Nazarite. So we can't take away from the fact that very holy people were Nazarites, and that being a Nazarite is a holy thing. But here's an interesting thing about Nazirut. When you have completed your oath of Nazirut, whatever it is, however long you've committed to being a Nazir, right? And usually it wasn't for an entire life. Very few people did it for their entire lives. Again, very few people were like Shimshon or Shmuel, because also meant no coming into contact with any dead bodies whatsoever, which also meant no burying the dead, no burying your parents or your wife or your children, because you can't become impure in any way. No making kiddush. So it'd be very hard for Chabadniks to be right, a Nazir. But let's say you take on the period for a year, 5 years, 30 days, a month, 6 months, whatever the period is, there is a process that the Torah lays out in this aliyah as to what you are meant to do upon completion. And you bring all these offerings and et cetera, et cetera. It's a big to-do for a Nazir when they've completed. One of the offerings is a sin offering, a karban chatas. A sin offering, and the Talmud says, why a sin offering? So one of the opinions posited is that because you are no longer a Nazir, it's a sin offering for the fact that your Nazirut ended, and now you're going to be less holy. So it's a preemptive sin offering for the fact that you're now going to be living a less holy life on the other end of your Nazirut. But the preponderance of evidence points to the other opinion that says that it is not a sin offering on behalf of what you will now become, but rather a sin offering for the period that you were a Nazir. And you say, wait a minute, what was sinful about that? Why in the world would I have to atone for being a Nazir? And the answer is that to a certain degree, we painted one end of the extreme
Right.
with the sota.
Right.
One whose permissive and promiscuous behavior is obviously entirely wrong. But even on the other end of the equation, on the restrictive end of the equation, there is an aspect of going to the extreme over there that is also not entirely correct. And that is that, and a message in the sense that we learned from Shavuot. God took the Torah out of heaven, away from the angels, and gave it to us here down on earth, into the world. And when the Jewish people said that perhaps the best way to receive the Torah is for us to engage in sleep, right? We know that Moshe had to wake them up. And most people will, when they hear that the reason we stay up all night is because Moshe woke up the Jewish people. They were not there at the foot of Sinai. And they will have this picture in their mind that all the people overslept their alarm clocks, right? And when Moshe goes running around, everybody get up, God's at the mountain. Like, oh shoot, did we all? Oh man, they looked at their clocks, and like that moment we all have had in our lives. We're like, oh my God, I'm late. Pull up the put on clothing and rush out the door. No, it wasn't by accident that they overslept. They deliberately overslept. And they thought, what better way to receive the Torah than in a dreamlike state? How do most prophets receive their prophecies? When they're just slightly removed from their physical and material consciousness, when they're in a dreamlike state where their soul is a little bit elevated and transcended above the body. And they said, if it works for the prophets in receiving the revelation, it should work for us. That's probably the best state where we receive the Torah, where our souls are just a little bit removed from our bodies and from this world. And Moshe says, you missed the whole point. I took the Torah out of heaven and brought it down here. So the Torah is on its way down and you guys are on your way up and you guys pass right by each other. And the Torah comes down to this world because this world is the world that is waiting for that the transformation that the Torah and we can bring it. And the Sota, not the Sota, I'm sorry, the Nazir cuts themselves off from association with the world. And to a certain degree, it's a very holy thing, but in a way, it's a little bit of a selfish thing. It's saying that my own holiness and my own self-restriction means that I am going to stay slightly removed from aspects in this world that could use my engagement and my refining of them. And the Sota is still considered a positive thing, because for a period of time, maybe it's exactly what the doctor orders. If you know that you are somebody who is by nature a little bit more indulgent, a little bit more permissive, et cetera, then maybe you do need to go through a period of self-restriction and self-containment. But to understand that that's not the ideal state. That's not the truly ideal state. It might be a necessary state. It might be a period, but it is something that is not the ideal way that God wants a Jew to be in this world. And so there's an element of atonement necessary on the other end of it. And before I then spell out, conclude on this point, go ahead, Carrie.
Isn't there a halacha like you should not build fences around fences also?
Yes, and one of the sources of that principle is from right here. Very good, exactly. And the expression is lo dayach ma she'asra Torah. It's not good enough what Torah has forbade you, that you have to add to it. And again, it's that point that if Hashem has left this open for you, then Hashem is not only green lighting your engagement with it. Hashem is kind of telling you that this is something that find a way to elevate it. This is not something that you should kind of leave out there on its own, but rather find a way to engage and bring it in for holiness. Now, again, this is only about things that are permissible in accordance with Torah. Things that are. This doesn't mean that. So everything in God's world we should be working to elevate, even if the Torah tells us that we should stay away from it. If I can find a way, this was one of Shlomo's mistakes. King Shlomo's mistakes was that in this thing, perhaps one can make an argument a little too smart, thinking that, and only for holy sake, for truly purely altruistic purposes. But Shlomo felt that maybe he could master engaging of certain things that otherwise the Torah frowns upon their engagement. Or I don't think, God forbid, we can't say that Shlomo ever applied this reasoning to something that the Torah outright prohibited, but even things where the Torah seems to frown upon. And Shlomo says, I feel like I have mastered the way to engage with it, etc., etc. The Torah even frowned upon that. We know that's the lore about Shlomo Melech, is that if there's any place where Shlomo Melech went a little wrong, was in that direction. But in things that are entirely permitted, which is again what the Nazir is swearing off of, even these things, these things, in a sense, the Torah wants your engagement and wants your elevation of it. So how do you balance? Because we do see that the Torah does encourage self-restriction, being on top of yourself and maintaining a high and holy standard. And the word for holiness in Hebrew is what? Kadosh. What does the word kadosh mean? Separated. So there is this necessity to kind of be separated and engage in a certain amount of self-restriction. And yet the Torah wants you also to engage and to share. So is there any metric? Is there any let's call it a torch or example of how to master the balance here? And the answer is yes. Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha. Look at the Kohanim. The Kohanim were paragons of the balance. The balance on the one hand of having those restrictions kind of a suite of restrictions that raises that holds them to a higher transcendence, as it were, than the average person. Because they were a Kohen, because they were engaged in holy service, they needed to be, right? A Kohen cannot become impure, and a Kohen is not allowed to drink wine, a lot of the similar things of the Nazir, right? But at the same time, the Kohen has to be intensely focused on the people, bless the people, share with the people, so that your self-restriction doesn't cut you off and remove you, but actually sets you up to then be able to give in a way that does not compromise you. And it comes back to what we were talking about before, kavanah. What is the kavanah in your efforts? Is your kavanah in your pulling back in order to then lean in? The Kohen makes sure that they hold themselves to a higher standard in order that they can then reach out for and help and share, at the same time not compromising. Kind of like putting on your mask, so then you can then help somebody else put on their mask, kind of thing, right? Help take care of yourself so you can take care of others, or maintain a standard for yourself so that you can reach out to others. Because very quickly, sometimes we know that people, when they reach out, they get stuck in the same muck. And so a Kohen has to a certain degree, put themselves in the situation by restricting themselves, etc., but all for the end of them being able to be in a better position to help and to reach out and to share. And that's actually in the Yivarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha. Yivarechecha Hashem, may God bless you, but what's the last word there? The Yishmerecha, and protect you. The balance, blessing and protection. Yair Hashem panav lechem, Hashem shine His countenance upon you, vichuneka, but give you grace, and that grace is that sense, that holy balance. Yisa Hashem panav lechem, Hashem lift His face to you, v'yasem lecha shalom, and give you shalom. What is shalom? Harmony, wholesome harmony, shalom. And that's, in a sense, the role of the Kohen. The Kohen is to try and teach you, to lead by example, and the Kohen within each every one of us, because we are Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, right? We are meant to be all a nation of priests, to achieve that balance, that unique balance, right? That's why that verse of being a nation of priests is the verse that immediately introduces the Ten Commandments, the moment where the Torah was given to us out of heaven and was brought to us, because God says, this is what I need from you. I need you to be engaged in this world, but I need you also to be higher than the world. I need you to be like a Kohen, to be transcendent, but also lean in, to be above the world, but engaged with the world, to be the fruition of the Varecha Hashem V'Yishmerecha Ya'er Hashem Panav Elecha V'Chuneka Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yasem Lecha Shalom, to walk that tightrope, to somehow do both at the same time, and to a certain degree, on the one hand, on paper it can sound very difficult, but in practice we all know what this looks like. We all know that one side helps the other. That my ability, if I maintain by myself a high standard, and I don't let myself, in a sense, sink to the level of being immersed in the mishigas around me, I can then engage with the mishigas around me and elevate it. So I don't cut myself off. I don't separate myself away. But I maintain I keep myself, in a sense, above the fray, not simply for the sake of protecting my own soul and my own integrity, but to put myself in a better position to help others. And that's the special balance that Yivarechecha at the end kind of says, here's the Sota, here's the Nazir, and I need you to strike the balance. And it's not halfway in between the two, God forbid, but it is the idea that the promiscuousness of the Sota should give you a healthy understanding of the advantage of the Nazir, but understand that the Nazir is still lacking a little something that the Kohen manages to to achieve. All right,
Let's
everybody.
assume- well, no.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Let's assume that the Sota was not guilty and had gone through this ordeal.
Yeah.
Do we have any, I don't know how to even ask the question,
Yes. Does she
but you
get
know what I'm
recompense?
thinking.
Yes. Does she get recompense? It's right there, black and white in the Torah. Of course, she then is blessed with a most bounteous life. If she has to go through the ordeal and she is in fact innocent, it says v'nikta v'nizra zara. That she's cleansed from all of this, and v'nizra zara, and seed is planted in her. In other words, that if she's desirous of children, she will have children. If she's desirous that the children should be what's it called? Should be a true zera, should be healthy, should grow and be healthy. That will be the case if she is looking for success in her efforts. That her plantings should yield in the most bounteous of ways.
You know, if we were saying that on the one hand, with the Sota, we've got a loosening of morals, and with the Nazir, we've got restrained morals, really tight morals. Then I could see the Shvil Hazav being the Birkat Kohen, let's say. But the Nazir takes it on voluntarily. She's only suspected of this, and it might not be true. And in fact, there's all this provision that if it's not true, all these wonderful things will happen. It doesn't seem like a good balance.
Right. No, but I will tell you like this, because as we talked about, and this is why I was careful to preface this in the beginning. She gets herself into this situation by voluntarily acting and nowadays, unfortunately, the term promiscuous has just been referred to actually doing the act. So when I say that she's engaged in promiscuous behavior, I'm like, no, she isn't. She didn't engage in promiscuous behavior. But back then, the idea of in a society where the Torah disallows, where it is a sin for a man and a woman, and it's not only on the woman, it's on the man as well, for them to be secreted at all with each other. It's not specifically not this specific person. Any man, a man and a woman should not be yichud, is a prohibition in Jewish society, regardless of whether somebody's suspicious or not.
But that's not the sin with which she's being tested, for which she's being tested.
Right. No, she's being tested to see if she went even further than this. But the
Exactly.
the reason that she's being subjected to this ordeal
Might
is
lead to
only in the
innocence.
aftermath of this forbidden promiscuous behavior. She was as I said again, this was behavior, even had her husband not warned her against this specific person, etc. Again, it speaks to the probable cause of it. Again, because the Talmud does talk about what happens if you have a vindictive husband that's just going around and saying, I forbid you from every man, or this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and any guy. This guy looked at you the wrong way, or you looked at this guy and I'm going to no. Then we would not. This is not that kind of case. There's a deliberative process to this. Okay, there is a deliberative process to this. And we only engage in this whole process of the Sota when, in a sense, the Bet Din acknowledges the validity of the suspicion and then her violation of this. If he comes to the Bet Din and says, I want to place a warning onto my wife because I don't. And the Bet Din just sees that this is frivolity, that this person is just being vindictive to a spouse or whatever it is. The Bet Din would not allow this process to begin. So your point is well taken, Paula. That this is not a case where the whole beginning of the Sota case is not where we're talking about a woman who's just an innocent, good-hearted woman, and she gets this whole thing dumped on her. This happens in a case where a woman very deliberately and blatantly violated a a warranted and suspicion, then she could still be innocent of the main crime. And the Torah says that even though you were guilty of the violation of the original trust, et cetera, because you went through such an ordeal, and that it turns out to have not been warranted, you will earn recompense for it. But this fact that she is in this ordeal in the first place is her fault. And again, I say this not because, but because that's the Talmud has an entire tractate devoted to talking about this, to talking about these exact things, the nuance of it, that this cannot be used as a cudgel for a vindictive husband to wield against his wife. The Bet Din and society does not allow for that.
Mm.
Does that help kind of address it?
Yeah, kind of, sort of. Thank you.
Yeah. I hear. Yes, I hear. But yes, but that's kind of the point. All right. Yes. Carrie, you wanted to ask something?
I mean, it's just like, I mean, no, just that, also in normal situations with normal things, you can have, two kosher witnesses warn the person beforehand of the sin they're about to commit, and they can visually see it happen, and then they can witness to it, that it happened. But in this, you can't. I mean, this is, the consequences are too dire. So there has to be this extra test, because
sure.
It's such a dire thing. It's not just being in a room alone with a man. You don't get capital punishment for that, right? You don't get stoned to death.
Right. Not only that, the whole process of the sota only happens in the after that this was triggered, and the courts agreed that there is a probable cause for the suspicion and allowed it to go forward, allowed the warning to go forward, and for the official kind of court of warning, kind of then triggering the watch of the sota, and again, she has to be secreted and the Talmud goes through it. How long? What kind of room? If there's an argument to be made that this was entirely, let's say this woman is the doctor, and this person is an orderly, right? And the man is an orderly, and there are times where she's going to call him into the office and have a consultation with him, or they'll sit down and they'll be analyzing a case or whatever it is. That would be thrown out. They're going to say, aha, we saw her in a room alone. They weren't in a room alone with nefarious intent. We know why they were in a room alone. Now, could it possibly be that this is all a charade and they actually did? Yeah, but in other words, the Talmud clarifies that this process gets put into place only when there was probable cause to issue the warning in the first place, and then there's probable cause to believe that the warning had been violated.
Right. It's actually treated with extra leeway in a way than many other things are, because it's such a serious consequence, and it's so hard to be sure.
Right. And to your point, Carrie and Paul, I think you're kind of taking the opposing approaches to this, but we're kind of meeting in the middle, which means that on the one hand, this is tough and very direct treatment for something that we don't otherwise have proof of one way or the other, and on the other hand, it is. Especially if you compare it to what society was way back then, an incredibly benevolent and insightful, because way to come to it. It's both.
You got to figure that the marriage is never going to be the same, whether she's back. I mean, no matter what the consequences, no matter what the reward, that is not going to be
but she's not going to get
relationship.
Die for it though. And also just to look at other cultures in that society.
I'm sorry. Just we got click. You hear me? No, your point is well taken, which is why it's a very interesting thing that the Talmud discusses this from like the 1,000-mile view. Is this thing a general good thing? If a husband has such suspicions, do we encourage the husband to come forward with such a thing, or do we actually encourage a husband to try and look the other way and pretend that he's not seeing something or whatever it is, and just just have err to the side of trusting? And not surprisingly, there's multiple opinions on that. Certain people say, no, it's a mitzvah for him to come forward, because if there is a suspicion, let it go through the whole process. And the others say, no, all this does is ends up having, as they say in Yiddish, a krumme egg, right? For the husbands to always have a crooked eye about and be suspicious, etc., etc. So I think it's also hard for us to really appreciate this, because in today's society, men, women coming together, whether for better or for worse, the society today is a lot more permissive about interactions between men and women. This wasn't always the case, and definitely wasn't the case in the time. So a man and a woman that were not married to be secreted in a room alone with each other in general was scandalous. How much more so if it's just somebody that there's already a warranted suspicion about, and you've been and the warning was given, and you deliberately and knowingly violated that. In other words, we can't turn around to the woman and the woman say, "What? You're coming down on me like a ton of bricks. When did I see that I was coming?" This is a final. This is a final step in a process and in actions that are already in a sense, she's kind of this is a situation that doesn't happen by accident, as it were. Definitely not in a society back then. All right, everybody.
Yeah.
I do gotta go, but importantly, as you said, I think you put it very well, Paula. You have the Sota as an example of low morals, a Nazir as an example of perhaps too restrictive morals, and the effort is that we have to have that high morality and that hold ourselves to a high standard in order then that we can be giving and sharing.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Have a good Shabbos. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Awesome.
All the very best, everybody.
Well, too. Thank you. All the best. Bye.